We're back again, working through the decades, best fantasy novels of each of the decades. Today, the 2010s, the 2010s, however we want to say that. Here's the 10 best.
So welcome to Fantasy for the Ages, the show where father and son sit down and talk about today fantasy books from the 2010s. I'm the son of that equation, Zach.
And I'm the father, Jim. And we've got another great top 10 list for you. These are my best fantasy novels of the 2010s, 2010s. Again, I got to figure out how to say that.
It is important to distinguish this time that it is your list because I actually read like adult fantasy in this decade. I got there. I became an adult in this decade.
Zach has not seen my list ahead of time, so I'm really interested to see how many of these he'll agree with, what he'll totally view with disdain, and what he might actually think, Dad, where's this book? We'll see what comes up as we toss these out. But
I'm guessing 3. I'll agree with 3.
Well, we will find out. Before I jump into the list, let me just give a shout out to show sponsor, Your Paper Quest. This is a book service that we've discovered and really think has a lot of value. It's a book of the month club style that sends you 2 books a month or every other month or every 3 months. You get to pick which way you want it. And they're always self-published independent authors. Some great things for all sorts of genres. We've got details in the show notes. Take a look. You might find something that could really add wonders to your TBR. All right, the 2010s. A top 10 list. I'm really excited about these books. They're some of my favorite fantasy books of all time now because we're getting to pretty recent times and the quality has just been climbing like crazy. So let's do the list.
What do we got?
Number 10 is one of the more recent books that I've read, Red Sister.
That's Mark Lawrence, right?
Yeah, Mark Lawrence, book 1 of his Book of the Ancestor trilogy. Now, I've read the entire trilogy. I'm just putting book 1 on the list, but you could kind of think of it as the entire trilogy. They're all pretty much at the same level. It introduces a different kind of world, a different experience, and nuns like you will never think of the same way again. It's got a character, Nona, that I really got captivated with. And she and her sisters, her friends, and the experiences they go through are fantastic. But I think what I like about the story, perhaps the best, is Mark Lawrence's style in this one, where he's really telling 2 stories at the same time. Most of the story you read in the first 2 books is flashback, and you get just little snippets of the current time, which is clearly flowing from what happened in the flashback. Book 3 is mostly then current time. We're pretty much done with the flashback, but the first half of the book, there's still some of that flashback. And just the way he interweaves the plot elements between those 2 timelines is brilliantly done. So really good fantasy, pretty traditional fantasy. There is some little elements of grimdark in there because Mark Lawrence can lean that way. People die, some of them in some very nasty ways, but it's great. It's my number 10.
Reserving judgment. I haven't read any Mark Lawrence, but he is on my list to eventually get to.
You haven't read any yet.
None.
There's a lot more to read. This is my 3rd trilogy I've read of his, and I love everything I've experienced. So this was 2017. Number 9, we return to A Song of Ice and Fire with book 5, A Dance with Dragons. George R.R. Martin, coming out in 2011, the last book we've seen in this series to date.
And the last that will make a top 10 list, probably, unless you have something else on here. I don't remember when 4 came out.
No, that is the last one from A Song of Ice and Fire. So note, 4 is the weaker of the 5 books for me, because over 3 different decades, 4 of the 5 now have appeared, and number 4 just doesn't show up.
Fair enough.
You can't have them all be winners sometimes. Same thing is true of number 8 on my series, where I've got a lot of books that come from this particular series and they're not all worthy of a top 10, but this one is. This is Changes, book 12 from the Dresden Files by Jim Butcher, which came out in 2010. From a lot of people who enjoy the Dresden Files, book 12 is the book. It's the one where things totally go next level. It's the end of one story arc, but the launching pad for the bigger things to come.
Mm-hmm.
As the title says, changes. There are some serious things that change as a result of the actions of this book.
I enjoyed the implications of this book better than I did the book.
Harry Dresden gets beat up in so many of his books, but this one takes that to extremes. The way he is impacted physically and emotionally through this book is like, wow, Jim Butcher, you hate Harry Dresden. We're keeping the spoiler light, so I don't want to go into the details, but holy crap.
Wish I could confidently say that this would be the last Dresden book that's going to show up. I don't know if I can.
Well, I'm skimming my list. It's the only, it's it. That's it for this decade. So Changes was the one that was strong enough to make my top 10.
Okay.
Because I've got some really strong books to come.
And notably, it's not that I hate the Dresden Files. I just think there's better.
Well, so do I, since there's 7 more books on this list.
What do we got?
Number 7 is Cain's Law, book 4 of the Acts of Cain. This is the culmination of this quartet of books by Matthew Stover. Cain's Law came out in 2012. So I do not include the third book of the Acts of Cain on any of the top 10.
But it's really just a intro into the fourth
prelude to this one. Yeah. But Cain's Law, holy crap.
I do agree it doesn't
the way you look at the whole rest of the series.
I agree that it doesn't deserve the number 1 slot in this decade, but it does belong in the top 10.
Yeah. So again, we've said it. I've said it now for 3 different decades here. You need to check out The Acts of Cain by Matthew Stover. You will thank me. You'll thank us. We've both read it and both appreciate it.
You also might curse us if you don't like grimdark, so just be aware of the various trigger warnings we've put on.
There are so many triggers in The Acts of Cain.
And if you're okay with those triggers, then absolutely go read it, because you will not regret it.
Number 6, The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. The Stormlight Archive starts off with this book, and that was right at the beginning of the decade, 2010. And this was Brandon Sanderson in a new way. We'd seen a lot of Brandon Sanderson fantasy already by this point, but The Way of Kings, this is epic. This was next tier.
I don't think I knew, obviously I knew, but I don't think I knew that this came out before The Wheel of Time was finished.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I did not know either, because I hadn't heard of Brandon Sanderson until The Wheel of Time finished with him writing it. So it was after that I started looking for things that he had done. And yeah, I didn't get to The Way of Kings until years after this. But 2010. Number 5, Words of Radiance, book 2 in the Stormlight Archive.
Almost like they're
by
good
Brandon
books.
Sanderson. This came out in 2014. So there's a chunk of time. He was writing other things as well in between. But yeah, it took a while to go from book 1 to book 2. Words of Radiance, definitely stronger than The Way of Kings for me.
Do you think you have some recency bias here, that you've just finished doing a reread of some of these?
I don't think so. I think they do truly stand up as incredible fantasy of this decade.
I agree. It's one of my favorite series so far, period. But I just wanted to throw that out there for the haters, you know?
It's possible. There are people who just don't get Brandon Sanderson, but I enjoy Brandon's writing. So.
Mm-hmm.
But, recency bias, number 4 is not. It's Towers of Midnight. Book 13 in the core 14 of the Wheel of Time. This was written by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson. So written after Jordan's death, Brandon Sanderson finishing using his notes. You probably know the story, but in case you don't, after he passed away, there was supposed to be one more book. The estate hires Brandon Sanderson to take all of Robert Jordan's notes and write the final book. He instead writes 3 massive additional books.
Which is not his fault.
No, it just needed it to get it done, and it's done very, very well. And this is the middle of those final 3.
I do think it's very, very good. It has the section that I'm aware of that has like the longest section of writing that Robert Jordan had already done kind of included. It's that whole sequence in a certain place is Robert Jordan writing.
That's very cryptic, but we're spoiler light.
This is spoiler light. I can't talk about it.
Number 3, Oathbringer, Brandon Sanderson, 2017. Okay, then that's all we get from the Stormlight Archive in this decade. So all 3 of the books make it into my top 6. They're great. And yes, I am rereading. I've just recently reread this one, but it's so much better than the first time I read it. It's just an incredible book, and the overall story is awesome. Number 2, The Crippled God, the final book of Malazan Book of the Fallen by Steven Erikson, which came out in 2011. So this is a series that stretched over 3 decades, started in the late 90s and didn't make my 90s list. And then this final book coming out in this decade. And yeah, it's just worthy. It's an incredible work of fiction, but it also has the benefit of being the culminating book of the series. So many payoffs, so much foreshadowing that finally comes true. And, some could argue that other books in Malazan are better than The Crippled God, but it's this high on my list because it delivers. And I get really annoyed when an author fails to land the plane. Steven Erikson, he glided in beautifully. Someday, Zach, you may know what this one's about.
I'll get there eventually.
You got a ways to go. Still on Dead House Gates, right?
Yeah, I'm at like 7% now. I've moved a percent.
But number 1, this should not be shocking if you kept dates in mind.
If you say the wrong thing here, I'm going to be shocked.
A Memory of Light.
There we go. That's
Robert
what I was
Jordan,
expecting.
Brandon Sanderson, the conclusion of The Wheel of Time that some of us thought we'd never get when Jordan passed away. This came out in 2013. It is such a good book.
As I get further from this book, I go, is it really such a good book on its own? And I'm like, yes, I think it is. But what makes it stand out so much for me here, and where it does belong that high for me, is because of it being a conclusion to this big Wheel of Time, being the 14 book, 15 if you include New Spring. And like you were saying with The Crippled God, it sticks the landing.
Yes, so many moving parts that all come into fit together and make this incredible finish. And honestly, The Crippled God and A Memory of Light share a lot of commonalities. They both feature incredible ending battle scenes where there are battles happening in multiple locations all at the same time, with different characters involved, with facing incredible odds and overcoming situations that they couldn't see ahead of time. And how are they ever going to pull it off? And I mean, they're very similar in the general structure and benefiting from tons of foreshadowing and also being very, very satisfying. I recently did an episode saying which is better, the best epic fantasy of all time, Malazan or Wheel of Time. And well, the order of these 2 books here reflects how that came out on my episode.
Fair enough. I'm almost surprised by that, because for a long time you've been going, I don't know, am I going to have a new favorite series? But it sounds like no.
It was really close. As I say on that other episode, Wheel of Time is still my number 1. Malazan is 1A. Right there. All right, there's my top 10 list of incredible fantasy books from the 2010s. Any last words, Zach?
Yeah, can I have an honorable mention?
Yes, you can.
I actually am pretty sure I have the right decade on this one.
Nice. What would you want to see in here?
It's not going to be number 1 slot, but I would have put it in my 9 or 10 relatively recently there. I think I have it right here. Valor.
Ooh, the Faithful and the Fallen.
It's good, classic feeling fantasy.
John Gwynne.
This is from, oh goodness.
I definitely enjoyed the Faithful and the Fallen. It didn't rise high enough for me to break my top 10, but
2014, and I think
worthy.
Specifically one of the character arcs that Valor has. There's so much that happens, and not that big of a book.
Mm-hmm.
It would get my like number 9 or number 10 slot probably.
You probably made some people very happy. So thank you for that honorable mention. On his list, it would be top 10. And I don't hate that book. That's a good one. What do you think out there, viewers? That's what the comment box is for. Share your thoughts on books that you think shouldn't have been on this list, what you would have put there instead, or if there's any that are in the wrong order and you just want to say, no, you got the wrong one, number 1. Put it down there. I'll definitely read and respond to what you have to say. And while you're at it and thinking about comments, again, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you'll see our next episodes, including the final conclusion of this decade series as we talk 2020s. Coming to you soon. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you next time.